The reason it's Warp'ed Films 10 is we started making stuff in 2002. As Warp'ed Films, we made a short called My Wrongs. And we've managed to extend our birthday celebrations into this year, because this was 2003 was the year that we made Dead Man's Shoes, just down the road in Matlock. So I was a bit sort of, I kind of, when I was asked to come and do the talk, and I thought, yeah, I'll do it. And then I started looking at some of the speakers and thinking, why do they want me to come and talk? I don't know what shall I talk about in terms of media education. As in the great traditions of writers, and especially in the film industry, you write what you know. So Richard Curtis will carry on writing scripts about middle-class white men running around London, falling in love with Americans. And Shane will make films about working-class kids in Nottingham, and George Lucas will probably keep making films about Ewoks. So I will write what I know. I started off wanting to be a film director. But I think that's partly to do with the conception that we have of what, especially back in the 80s, of what filmmaking involved. The only role most people understand is that of a film director. I went to university in Leeds and did a media course there, and then came to the hallowed halls of Sheffield Hallam University to do a master's degree. And I started off, before I'd gone to university, I'd not made any films at all. I got to uni, made about 3, and I tried to set up my own TV station, which was a bit of a daft thing to try and do. And then by the time I'd finished doing the masters, I'd made been involved in probably about 15 more films. And the point the reason I sort of brought this stuff up is that when we were all that time and all that education, and I walked out with all those qualifications under my arm, and never once in my career in the film industry has anyone asked me about my master's degree, about my BA, about my A-levels, or even what bloody O-levels I got, which is really annoying because I worked really, really hard and did really well. And it's, I think, part of trying to relate it to what you guys do, hopefully, is that that's not meant to undermine the education that I had, because actually what was important during that process was, like I said, I started off, I'd not made anything. I had a desire to make stuff, but I'd not made anything. I didn't have access to the equipment. I didn't have access to the materials to make stuff. So going to university gave me access to the materials to make stuff. Going to film school did the same thing as well. I had, especially at Hallam, we had, I know it was shot on film. Don't shoot, I hardly ever shoot on film now. Shoot on, cut on Steenbecks, cut on Avids, very, very, very early Avids. So all of that stuff was access to. It was access to other people, like-minded people who wanted to make films, who were interested in films, who were, you know, you'd make films during the day, you'd watch films during the night, or vice versa, depending on your social network. So that kind of exposure to those experiences informed what we do now. It's the same process we have now as we employ people. So much of the employment process of working in the film industry is very, very little to do with what comes in on a CV. It's who's recommended, who have you seen, what experience has that person got? You know, do they turn up on time? Do they, you know, what's their lighting like? Do they know how to make the budget work? And those things aren't, you know, you might have the technical qualifications to, you know, do a budget with Movie Magic, but actually what's more important is that someone knows how to spend that money and knows how to deliver a film. And it's that, you know, we live in an interesting world, you know, it's an art form, and to the outside world it's seen as an art form, but to film producers it's a massive, massive conflict of art and economics, where you're constantly, you know, it's not just one person with a pen or a paintbrush. It is, you know, 60, 70 people standing in a field, getting rained on, lugging loads of equipment, and all these people have got degrees. you know, but they're all standing in the middle of a field. It's a bit like going camping with kids. You just kind of go, this is a really good idea, and then you get there and you kind of go, all I'm doing is standing here shouting at a bunch of kids, going, do that, no, that way. So let me show you, if you don't know the stuff we do, let me show you a little bit of what we've done.
I find it's best to take things one step at a time.
To us, and a wonderful evening of lovemaking.
Basically, you were the worst boyfriend I have ever had.
He's got some big ideas.
I'll do this stuff.
My plan is, though, to put a bomb on a crawl. We're way beyond crows now, Faisal.
What we're going to do has got a lasting history, echo through the ages.
Who's picking on you, lad?
Harvey.
Harvey? I've got one of those for you. My name is Harvey.
I'm going to have to go back to town in a bit, mate, to sort some business out.
They're bad people. They should suffer.
What about you, mate? What would you do?
You're not going to cause any trouble, are you, lad?
Get no trouble from me, sir.
We started off as low-budget filmmakers, but we started off in 2002. We made the record company Warp'ed Warp'ed Records. It's in the title, Barry. Had started off in Sheffield and had just recently moved down to London, and had made a reputation with themselves as an independent record company. Mark Herbert, who's the boss, had a really close relationship with the guys who'd set up Warp Records, and was explaining to them the trauma of trying to get films off the ground. And they said, well, we could do that. And he said, yeah, but you've never done it before. And he said, yeah, but we'd never set up a record company before. So they set up the film company and were very ingenious about the way that they approached the talent who were already working with them, people like Chris Cunningham and Vincent Gallo and Chris Morris, and they wanted to get their first bunch of films off, short films, and rather ingeniously, their first films they used, although they created these films, they used the record network to distribute those films. So it was, you know, early days of the internet, and they used the shops like FOP and HMV, and they created, when we made My Wrongs, they used the distribution network and the record shops to sell a low price DVD of that film, which was relatively successful. It's still one of the struggles of kind of working the economics of making a short film, of how much it costs to make and how much you can actually make off of it. Don't quite add up, but it was a way of showing that there was something to do. There also was an ingenious bit of marketing on Warp's behalf, which I don't think was particularly deliberate. But they decided that the release date of My Wrongs was going to be the date in February, which just happened to be the day after the BAFTAs, and we won the BAFTA the night before. So the following day we had a film on the shelves, and it was quite exciting. But now, as a film company, because of the way that the industry is changing, because of some of the changes, some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, we're expanding more into television, especially, and using a lot of the skills that we've learned over the years as filmmakers and independent filmmakers into the TV market. So we have made 18 films. 7 TV series. We've earned 7 BAFTAs. We've made 1 world record, which was for the most amount of zombies we did a thing at the 15 years of Big Chill. They asked us to come and do an event at the opening, on the opening day. So we did that, and we got the most amount of zombies in one place, which was about 5,000 if you're thinking of trying to beat it. So it's actually quite a difficult, it's a record that changes hands quite a lot. It's quite a popular one to try and get. But there's a whole, so they've got quite strict rules on everyone's got to be made up in a certain way, and everyone's got, everyone's got to be present within a certain amount of space for a certain amount of time. So we ended up doing this whole sort of stage show, kind of mock game show, and everyone who came into the arena to watch it were either came made up, or we had to set up makeup stations and we're making them up. But we had to have evidence, so we had to get them all to sign bits of paper. So a lot of extras. This year, we've had the Shane Meadows' Stone Roses documentary come out. We've had Southcliffe in August on Channel 4. For Those in Peril is about to come out on the 4th of October, which is the last of the Warp'ed films. Warp'ed is a low-budget digital slate that we've been running. And we made 3 short films, including stuff by Corinna Faith, Jesse Armstrong, who wrote Peep Show and stuff like that, and Shinola, who are a very successful pop promo and advertising collective, 3 guys. We've also got Talking to the Dead coming out on Sky, and Lynn Ramsey's Olympic film Swimmer, and For Those in Peril was in Cannes. So it's technically the first time we've ever had the UK arm of Warp'ed had films on in Cannes, which, for the amount of time we've been going and the kind of stuff we've been making, we've kind of been banging our head against a brick wall a bit with Cannes, so it's quite nice to get in this year. And coming up next year, is it still on there? Oh yeah, there we go. We just finished, we're in post-production on a film called 71, which is written by Gregory Burke, who wrote Black Watch, the Scottish National Theatre's piece, and directed by Jan Dimage, who did Top Boy, and it's his directorial debut, but it's also the biggest film we've ever done. And set in 1971 in Belfast, which of course Belfast doesn't look like Belfast anymore, so of course we filmed it in Sheffield, and in Sheffield and Blackburn. If you ever want to stage a riot, Blackburn, really helpful, really helpful. It was insane. We've got a big project called Destroyer, which is written and directed by Tom Shankland, which we're hoping to start filming next year, but that's all set in the Falklands War. And hopefully Vic and Bob, once they finish their TV series, will want to do a film. And so, I think, in terms of, I think Shane Meadows was, the Stone Roses film last year was when we were making it, there was a lot of fans in the office, just men of a certain age. And then now we've got a Vic and Bob film, so we're kind of ending up making what we like, or what we're interested in. Talking about, sort of slightly jumping back into the, so we made this vast amount of stuff. Well, it's not that vast, but relating again back to when I started with Warp, Mark was lining up to produce his first project, the Chris Morris short, and he asked me, he said, and the reason he asked me was because we knew each other and we'd made stuff, and he'd witnessed me making stuff. And I knew a lot of the technical aspects of filmmaking that he didn't. And it was a complementary sort of relationship in the sense that he was kind of like, well, I need someone who can do this bit of especially the post-production side of things. Can you, let's do this together. So that's how I started with Warp. It was, and we took the decision prior to working for Warp, I had left university, left Hallam University, but I had managed to retain a job which was helping basically coordinate all the projects, the master's projects, which meant I had access to all the equipment. So I kept making stuff. I kept the means of production were still in my hands, and then I set up a small company called Cargo, and that was kind of after having all of the practical elements of filmmaking and being out with crews. I think that was one of the first sort of experiences I had of actually producing. I think that's one of the things that I kind of, if I was designing a course, I think it's an essential part of it because it's something you don't necessarily get exposed to. And even just when I set up Cargo, we set up Cargo because we had a film that was the Arts Council wanted to give us some money for. And that film required a company being set up. They wouldn't give us the money unless we had a registered limited company. And I had no idea what that involved. And eventually it took me about a year to set up the company, understand that. I was working with Ashley down at Nickelodeon and stuff like that, and trying to get this film off the ground, and applying for money, and doing the whole process that I do naturally now as the head of production, in terms of with financiers. But at that stage, for them, I was a completely unknown quantity, and so relying on quite heavily on a mentor of mine called Keith Griffiths, and also just having to go through the process of going, all right, actually, what does this mean? What does it mean to set a good company? What does it mean to be freelance? What does it mean? What are my obligations? Just the normal humdrum, run-of-the-mill sort of things. And then what does it mean having these relationships with financiers? I think one of the other things as well was you're making. It's the clash of art and economics. So you want to make this film and you want all the money to go on screen and you want it to be good. And so you don't want to expend the money on things like lawyers or so you do it all yourself. And so you end up spending it's a bit like being in a prison movie, so you work out how to do your own defense. So you end up reading everything that comes into you. The process of doing a short film, if you were involved with regular financiers, it's unfortunately they tend not to make the legal process any simpler. You still have to assign rights, you still have to you still have to have all these bits of paper that they want to show that you own the film and that you're going to make the film for them and that you own the necessary rights. And so actually it was a massive education those first few years at Cargo, which helped when I started working with Warp, because I'd gone through that process and had taken the time incredibly slowly to learn what I was doing, even just on a very, very basic level. It meant that when I went out and that when we started up Warp, I could still, all of the skills that I'd learned were applicable to setting up Warp. We were able to keep our overheads low. We were able to work out of Mark's shed in his back garden, and we'd bring a lawyer in at the very, very last minute if there was anything we were struggling with, because the two of us could handle most of the elements of that. Now we have a head of business affairs and a legal assistant, and we have lawyers that we employ. And that bit of life is a hell of a lot easier. But having that understanding is a massive boon to what I do now. And that came from that period of sort of like 2 or 3 years of trying to do stuff with no money, with no budget. As Cargo, again, before I started with Warp, we went on. We had a film called Pufferfish, which got on the long list for the BAFTAs on the short. And while it didn't win anything, it did get us some meetings with people, myself and the director. But again, that was an education. In reflection, it was probably an incredibly bad experience, but on reflection, it was a good education. We went into these meetings with people who didn't know who we were and couldn't invest any money in us because we were so inexperienced, but liked what we did. The art side of the equation worked for them. They kind of went, okay, actually, we like what they do. But the economic side of the equation, especially when we walked in and pitched two of the worst possible feature film ideas, and stumbling, like a bit like this, stumbling, slightly esoteric, thinking we could get away with it, and yeah, we never heard from them again. And I bump into some of them now, and they have no recollection. Those meetings are burnt into my memory, but there's just another person passing through, someone who made something interesting. So it's one of the things I kind of meant to mention earlier, is this idea that going back to that qualification thing, is you walk out and actually either you've got a body of work that people are interested in, or someone's ended up recommending you, and that's that's the tipping point of moving into of getting stuff off the ground. I mean, interestingly with Warp, both Mark and I were Mark the boss were small independent companies. Mark had produced Phoenix Nights, that was a relatively successful TV producer, but we would never reach that point where we could push. We were always getting knocked back from within the industry because people weren't that interested. The interesting thing of stepping into Warp, working with Warp, is you're working within a brand, and that brand opens doors. It's quite good walking up to someone's. On My Wrongs, it happened quite a lot. It was, you know, you'd knock on someone's door and say, "Can we use this as a location?" And you'd explain who you were, and they'd have, you know, loads of Warp records in their office. So that even just the simple thing of there being a recognition, and the financiers recognised that, but also far more importantly was the fact that Chris Morris was attached to this project. But you know, as independent producers before we worked with Warp, we were going up with first-time directors, first-time writers, and while there's schemes and methods of supporting those writers and supporting that talent, you have to be exceptional to get out there. Whereas if it's someone like Chris who's coming with an automatic cachet and an ability to direct and someone that people are interested in working in, that made a massive difference. And the same thing happened, you know, on My Wrongs, we met, Paddy Considine was the lead in it. Paddy Considine was very good friends with Shane Meadows. Paddy, because we'd released My Wrongs as a DVD, Paddy said, "Oh, I've made all these shorts with Shane. Maybe you guys want to meet up and distribute them." Shane and met with Mark, and that led on to us making Dead Man's Shoes. And one of the things, I'll talk about Dead Man's Shoes in a second, but one of the things, the processes of Dead Man's Shoes is we financed it in sort of 48 hours, which is incredibly unusual, partly to do with the level of the budget, but also partly to do with the fact that we were walking into financiers with, you know, we just won a BAFTA producing a short, but Shane had made 3 or 4 feature films. And so it was a bit of a no-brainer for them. There was a talented person that they wanted to work with. One of the things, talking about the art and economic side of things, we are duty-bound to look after the brand of Warp. You know, Warp has a reputation in terms of interesting artists and supporting those artists. The record company did, and so we kind of wanted to mimic that process because we didn't want to. You know, you've got a logo, we share a website, all those kinds of things. So there's an obligation there for the stuff that we want to make, of making sure that it fits in within that. You know, well, there's projects that have come to me, which since this has been recorded, I can't really talk about. But there's projects that come to us, and you kind of go, well, actually, if you wanted to make a load of money, we could do that. But because of the Warp brand, you've got to take a decision, and also the other talent that you work with, and you kind of go, actually, we can't possibly end up doing that because it will taint what we've done. Make good stuff. That's kind of the basic principle of what we do. I'm going to kill Neil Gaiman for doing a much better speech a few months ago in which he said, "Make good art." I've been doing make good stuff for years now, but that's one of the things that we talk about. You know, the sort of bottom line of whatever we do is the quality level of trying to of making sure technically and artistically that we care about the stuff. You spend far too long in the filmmaking process to just churn stuff out just for the sake of making money. There's got to be something, you know, you'll spend that money, but ultimately, you know, in 10 years' time, you'll be able to look back and kind of look at that material and kind of go, yeah, actually, I'm really proud of that. We have an obligation to look after our artists. The record company, I think, was one of the first to kind of really, really generously share in the profits with their artists, and it's one of the things we've been that. A lot of, especially our core directors, are close to us, and we want to support them in what they want to do, and that's what makes the stuff different. And you know, makes us different from, say, someone like Working Title. Not that they don't. I'm sure they look after people like Richard Curtis very well, but in terms of the artists that we're looking for, then, you know, I wouldn't say that it's the people want to make the most straightforward or the easiest or the most commercial things in the world, but you want to make the stuff that they've got in their head. talk about being aware of an audience, and actually being aware of an audience that isn't the traditional audience. I think until relatively recently, you know, and you know, I suppose it still happens if you go out into the cinema. You've got one of the things that happened, say, with Dead Man's Shoes is we became very, very aware of. It didn't do that particularly well at cinema, but in terms of on DVD and people responding to it and people sort of writing up on IMDb and stuff like that of how big it was outside of the traditional sort of audiences. One of the things the record company's always done is that they say if they're making like a record for Autechre or something like that, they would they might not make top 10 LP in the UK, but they knew they were massive in Japan, and they knew that they were massive in Australia or something like that. So they were aware of the value of what that artist could do internationally, and I think that's one of the things that we've always. I think in Ashley's introduction is, although we're based here and although we're making particularly UK-based films, we're acutely aware that the stories that we're telling travel. This is England's quite an unusual one. Is something that you would see and think is, so specific to a time and a place. It's massive in Australia, massive in Scandinavia, massive in Germany, and massive in France. And it's, that might be the Truffaut shot at the end of This Is England. But there's that sudden awareness of actually of where your stuff works. Whereas This England, nothing in the US. Very big struggle to get Shane's stuff to work in the US. And one of the things we're renowned for is taking risks. And partly that's to just do with the process of filmmaking, of wanting to be able to push stuff and to be able to take stuff further, but also in terms of the talent that we work with want to be able to take those risks, whether it's Chris Morris wanted to make a film about jihadi terrorists, or wanting to do something like Barbarian Sound Studio, which is, a film that takes place, 100% inside a sound recording studio and is immersed in the whole sort of world of giallo, and very, very early on we were very unsure of how a market would react to it, but market reacted very well, but we were very proud of making it. So I'll quickly talk about Dead Man's Shoes was the first ever feature that we did. And this is very important to the company, not only because it's so iconic, but also, especially with fans of the company, but also just in terms of the methodology of how we made it. And at the time, in the early 2000s, it was just the utilisation, flipping back to having access to equipment and access to how you made stuff. I think this was there was plenty of other films that were, that was post-Dogma. So there's plenty of people shooting stuff on, video cameras and stuff like that. But what we were able to do here is we kind of approached the whole production methodology of kind of going, all right, well, if we were trying to do something we didn't have any money, how would we do it? And then the idea, Shane is one of those directors who you can do that kind of stuff with. And he goes, well, if we had two minibuses, if we had two Previas, and we fitted everything we could have in the two Previas, that's how we started coming up with things. So Shane and Paddy had come up with this idea, this comedy called The Skull, about a social worker who is trying to stop kids getting into trouble and getting into drugs. And then Shane and Mark went down. They had this idea of how we were going to do it, but we said, look, let's go down and see if we can get some money for it. So they, like I said, they had 48 hours. They went to, I think they went to the Film Council, and the Film Council at the time went, it's one page. Come back to us with more of an idea, and maybe we'll talk some more about it. And then they went to Film 4, and Tessa at Film 4, Tessa Ross, said, yeah, okay, how much do you need? And they said, 500. And they knew they could get another 250 from East Midlands because they were willing to support Shane. And so they didn't need to go to see BBC Films. So they'd kind of gone down to London, they'd got the money and left, and I got a telephone call on the way back up going, Mark, going, all right, you've got 750 grand, do a budget. And I get told off about that quite a lot still, because the process of budgeting should be, how much is this, read the scripts, how much is this going to make? And sometimes I go back and go, well, how much have you got? Because, you know, I can make it, you know, if you want me to make it for 10 million, we can make it for 10 million. So the methodology expanded slightly. We had a bit more money with 750 grand, so it expanded. But the whole process was we're going to travel to Matlock. We're all going to be based in Matlock. We're all going to live in Matlock. We're all going to have a vehicle for for each department. There was an art department of 2 people. We're going to shoot all on location, and stylistically, it was the bringing together of those people into that process, and of recruiting the right crew and the right cast who would be willing to work that way. And that's one of the things I talk about a lot with production. One of my jobs as the head of production is instilling the sort of the attitude and the approach that we had with this across all the projects, because again, going back to that whole thing, it's it's a physically demanding, laborious process, filmmaking, and it's more fun if there's a bunch of you there wanting to do it and are approaching it in the right way. The elements that we had from this, after making Dead Man's Shoes, we made 2 more features called, one was called Grow Your Own, and the other one was called This Is England. This Is England was massive, came out first. Grow Your Own came out 6 weeks later and tanked. I produced that one. But in terms of, and at the same time we were setting up a thing called Warp'ed, mid-noughties, Film Council and Film 4 were aware that more and more people were going out making films with their credit cards. And this is that, kind of comes back to I get asked quite a lot at lectures and stuff, what film school should you go to? And there is a massive question to be had for all the benefits of being immersed in the benefits that I had from going to a film school where I had access to equipment and access to kit. I also had a grant, I came from a place where not a lot of people went to university, so they were quite happy to pay for nearly up to masters. But nowadays, the amount of money that you would end up spending on a course, you can get you could buy the kit that we had for the Stone Roses documentary that we made. So you could shoot, edit, and nowadays, technically distribute on the amount of, on the cost that it would take you to go to a film school. So the question is you don't go there for the kit anymore. You don't go there. You go there for the knowledge, and you go there for being immersed in that world. I think that's one of the things. Again, coming back to that experience, those experiences being important. The whole thing with Dead Man's Shoes, the methodology of Dead Man's Shoes fed into this scheme that the Film Council and Channel 4, Film 4 were trying to set up. They wanted to set up they wanted to tap into all those new directors who were coming up and making films for low budget. Interestingly, low budget in the mid-noughties was anything under sort of 1.5 million. So there was a bidding process. That was another sort of learning thing of the political machinations of working with all of these different bodies. But it gave us a huge amount of, the first 3 years of the scheme were designed to make 6 or 7 films, and then they let us extend it so we can make another 4 films. So we've made 10 films as part of Warp'ed, and they were all approached with this thing. And like I said, in the mid-noughties when we first started doing that, we were making films for less than, they were all meant to be less than $1 million. I think some rose up to about 1.2. Nowadays, there's a lot more low-budget schemes. Like Microwave, which is like 100 grand, 150 grand. That's the total budget, which Shifty was made on. and the iFeatures schemes, which are, I think, about 300 grand. So they, and a field in England, which I don't know if anyone's seen, Ben, who made Kill List with us, made a field in England, and they made it for like 300 grand. So this is the shift in technology from that time, where it's the democratization process of production, and those things help. Those things being cheaper, those things being more accessible, you can do stuff. But a lot of it is driven, again, going back to the approach and to the attitude of people like the director on those things. Four Lions is our most successful feature film. Like I said, it's a bit of a risk. So if any of you have seen it, especially when you're trying to pitch it to people, because everyone loved hearing the pitch. But it was never everyone was scared to finance it. So God bless Film 4. But I think there's an interesting talking about Dead Man's Shoes and the democratization of the film, of the production process. This was our experience of the shift in the financing process of films. Like I said, we could get some money for it, but no one wanted to. We wanted to make it for like two. We needed, the original budget was about 2.5, and we couldn't raise that finance. No one wanted to give us that money. Everyone kept circling around it and just backing off because they thought it was too controversial. Which they were silly. It's just about 4 guys just want to change the world. This is how we pitched it quite a few times to people, and they didn't want to tell them what was going on. So we worked out we could make it for about 1.8. So what happened was we did the traditional Film 4 stuck in a chunk of money for the TV rights and for equity, and then we went out to very rich people, EIS financiers. And interestingly, so we made the budget up to 1.8, and they were very sort of, no one interfered too much and let Chris get on with it, because that's the way Chris works. At one point we were considering, when we were struggling for the money, we were considering selling it on eBay. This is pre-Kickstarter and Indiegogo and projects like that. And Chris and Mark had worked out a way of selling it on eBay. I'd never quite got my head around how they would do it, but yeah, they came in and just went, set up an eBay account. We also, like I said, it's slightly before Kickstarter, but we put up a notice out for fundingmentalism.com, which was a way that people who wanted to bid to support the film could support the film that way. We never completed going down that route, but we got about I think it was 600 or 700 backers for the brief period that it was up, and so Chris did a special. When the film was finished, he sent a card to everyone with of those people who'd offered to help, and with a little sell from the film, from the 35mm. So you know, we didn't invent Indiegogo, we didn't invent Kickstarter, but we were doing it. The methodology behind it and the logic behind it was in the ether, I guess. So this got funded by Film 4 and and rich people through an EIS scheme. Similarly, at the same time, I think if anyone wants to do a project, they should look at Kick-Ass, which happened at the same time. Matthew Vaughn had a script which incredibly violent, incredibly 18 rated, but effectively a comic book film. So none of the studios would touch it. It'd done the rounds a lot, and he wouldn't change it. None of the studios would back it. So he was in a similar situation to us. It was a hot property, but no one wanted to touch it. His was a slightly more expensive proposition than ours. But so Matthew Vaughn knows a lot, much more richer people than we do. So it's probably bad grammar there, but yeah, he had apparently there's an apocryphal dinner that he had, and sat down with these people and said, "Will you finance my film?" And they all said yes. And I think there's an interesting parallel between those two films. Those two very successful independent British films, financed outside of the traditional, mainly financed outside of the traditional methods in the UK. But I think that there's something, I think that happened in 2009, 2010. So time of the financial crash, everyone's getting a bit jumpy, and in our heads, we're having to shift. You know, we're aware that money isn't going to be around for, you know, there isn't the money that used to be there, and that we're going to have to think of a new way, a potential new way of financing. And that, you know, that has been paralleled with the rise in stuff of people putting stuff on Kickstarter, putting stuff on Indiegogo. It's interesting now that only now that in the past sort of 12 months, where larger Hollywood, you know, there's Veronica Mars, which is a 20th Century Fox project, which they could never get off the ground, but of course they put it on Kickstarter and have kickstarted the traditional filmmaking process by showing the studio that there is an appetite for this film out there, because a load of people have already bid on it. They raised something like $2 million. The film will cost a lot more than that, but there's that interest there. Kill List was filmed by Ben Wheatley, and it was his second feature film. Interestingly, when we started, it was made as part of Warp'ed. Interestingly, when we started Warp'ed, all of the directors, it wasn't designed specifically to be new directors, but they were all first-time directors. None of them had made feature films before. They will have made shorts, they will have made promos, and they will have made adverts. By the time we got into the second batch of Warp'ed films, virtually all of the directors had made feature films before, and they'd made them ultra-low budget. Ben had made a film called Down Terrace prior to this for about £8,000 in a house in Brighton, which was a great film. And again, he was someone who was coming into the process with a huge amount of experience, TV experience, animation experience, viral. He started off making virals for the internet. And because of that process, it felt very much like going back to basics, like going back to Dead Man's Shoes, and we made Kill List with Ben, because his speed, again, what I've said before about his experience on set and his understanding of what he would need in the process was kind of like, well, I just need this, this, and this. You know, I don't need to spend time worrying about that because I've got it already. Also, when we got into post-production, because the Kill List budget was one of the lowest budget ones we've done on Warp'ed. The team behind it were competent enough and were savvy enough and had the education to do virtually everything. They'd set up the budget so that they did it was a one-man sound team. It was a single composer working in an attic. Andy, the producer, online it. And it was only when we got into some difficulties on the grade that we actually went into a large post-production facility. So they were doing virtually everything at home on the Macs. And even at one point, it was premiered at South by Southwest, and at one point we were going to generate our own DCP to take to, because you have the technology now to do that. So what I was saying before about would you pay to go to film school when you have the means at your hand to generate something like that? And that was, a big success for us, critically as well as commercially. And I'm going to do a bit of keep talking about this experience thing of kind of going, actually, you know, it's making stuff. It is the process that actually informs what we do, and which I think is very, very integral to our success. We had an opportunity, because of something like Warp'ed, to churn out a lot of material. Churn out's the wrong description, because none of it was treated like a sausage factory or anything like that. But it's the idea that we were constantly making stuff. And to borrow from that great pop psychologist Malcolm Gladwell, which I think this has just been debunked, but I quite liked the methodology of it. So the mathematical reason why Warp are successful. So each film has got roughly 30 days prep, 30 days shoot, 150 days of post. So total of 210 days. Work on that 10 hours a day if you're lucky. So 2,100 hours per film. So we made, over those 18 films, we made 375,000 hours of film, which is, if you work a 10-hour day, that's 10 years of filmmaking. So that was, his, if you've not seen his Outliers thing, it's the reason the Beatles are so good is because they played for the equivalent of 10 years in Hamburg, and they'd played so much stuff that they just, if you're constantly making stuff, if you're constantly, and I think that with a lot of new directors is that the more exceptional, and Shane is a good example actually. You know, Shane not necessarily being a good example, a new director, but prior to making his first feature film, he was constantly making stuff. The amount of it took one of our interns something like 6 weeks to digitize all of the amount of material that he had lying around as films prior to him making his first feature film. So production has been democratized. Financing, I talked a little about, has been democratized, or it's changing. Distribution is getting, it hasn't been completely democratized. The whole rise of the digital cinema was supposed to encourage that, but it hasn't quite happened because of the way that the industry is integrated. But in terms of, I suppose, in terms of where we initially started, where we were doing really putting films out on DVD and selling them through record shops, you know, the fact that you can actually monetize Vimeo now, you can put stuff, you know, stuff up on YouTube, stuff can get out there. There's a whole wonderful world of content being available to people, and the more that stuff is created, the more that stuff is the means of getting that out to people. It's interesting within the industry is that despite the expense of going to having a theatrical release, the kudos and the marketing and the respect that a theatrical release has over something going straight to DVD is why it still continues. It's, you know, you're going into market. We've got a film coming up in For Those in Peril will come out on the 4th of October, and it's going up against quite a lot of other films, and is kind of touring. Barbarian was done the same. Barbarian was probably only out on about 20 screens, but it needed that. There was such a buzz sort of generated about it by sort of rabid film fans kind of talking about it, that Artificial Eye, who were distributing it, owned the Curzon On Demand site, and they put it on the Curzon On Demand site, and it was their second most successful sort of streaming hit since they've started doing it. I think the other one is Lynn Ramsey's We Need to Talk About Kevin. So there's an appetite there for people who can't access the cinema but want to see the film as soon as it's on its theatrical release. Again, thinking about A Field in England, which they released day and date across every single platform, you know, even on free TV, was a very, very interesting experiment by Channel 4, Film 4. Just briefly about film economics, again, because of that theatrical release, film economics for low-budget filmmaking, especially in the UK, doesn't exactly work. So again, you're balancing your art and commerce. Why are you making stuff if as I'll show you in a second, it doesn't quite add up? You're not going to make, if you're say a filmmaker in the US and you make something like Insidious for under, I think it's for $1 million, they made the first Insidious. If it then goes on to make, you know, 90 million, then you're in the money and you're sorted, and you can carry on making them. But within if you're making stuff which is subsidised by, you know, BFI, or and if you're selling those rights, selling your theatrical rights and your TV rights and your DVD rights, that's how it works. So you make $1 million at a box office. That's a hit, by the way. If you're a British filmmaker and you hit $1 million at the box office, you're classified as a player, a legend. Well, that's some of the language someone's used with us once before. So your exhibitors take at least 50%. At least 50%. On a film like Four Lions, they probably had that's called the nuggets, apparently. They'll take exhibitors, if they're really worried about your film, they might take more than that. If they really want your film, apparently The Phantom Menace, people were paying to let The Phantom Menace into their film, into their cinemas, which is more for all them. So the distributors take their P&A back. So if you're, you know, on a low budget film, it might be around 200k. So you're down to 300k already. Your distributor then splits what is left 50-50. So they take 50% and they give back to the film its 50%. And then you've got to pay back all of your equity. So on a £1 million film, it might be like 600 grand. So you're still in the red. You're sort of minus 450 there. So you then hope, you know, you get 50% of what's left, so we're getting 50% of minus 450 grand. So yeah, that's not a lot of money. Dead Man's Shoes has probably made about 100 grand at the box office, and it is sold over, actually probably This Is England is probably easy to remember. So This Is England was made for 2.3 million. We made 1.8 million at the box office, and we've sold 500,000 DVDs, and we're still not in profit. So be a distributor. But that's possibly one of the reasons the democratization of the distribution will be an interesting place that we go. So here, democratization of the YouTube. So in 2009, which is the year the iPhone launched, Morgan Stanley did a report, and they said by now the majority of traffic on mobile would be on mobile devices rather than desktop. So everyone who's got your iPad and your new iPhone will already be aware of that. But interestingly, the way that YouTube works is you've got people, I'd not heard of any of these people until I read an article on them. Freddie Wong, Ryan Higger, Jenna Marbles and Kevin Wu, and they're all in the YouTube's top 10 channels. So they've got over 2 million subscribers. And interestingly, what they're doing now is they are, look, Ryan Higger, 1.7 billion views of his stuff, which is just insane. So if thinking back to what I just said about This Is England, if it made 1.8 million at the box office, let's say it's 10 tickets, that's 180,000 people went to see it at the cinema. 180,000 people then have bought DVD, that's another 500,000. So we're still, maybe 2 people watch that, so we're still on, you know, just over 1 million views of This Is England, maybe another 500,000 from TV. This guy's got 1.7 billion views. Disruptive innovation is the way that the piece of technology has changed the way that all of these people now, not only because of the way that their YouTube works, they generate income from that, but they're also using stuff like Indiegogo and Kickstarter to generate income. They go out on their channels and they broadcast to their subscribers and say, look, I want to do one of them's doing a TV, I can't remember which one it is, doing a TV series. And he raises the money through, puts a call out on YouTube to his millions of subscribers, then raises the money on Kickstarter, and in that circular thing, he also produces, as well as making the TV shows, it's all set in a high school, comedy set in a high school, he also does presentations, really sort of simple animatics of how the budget, what he spent the fans' money on. And shows, you know, so he's on the 2nd series now. I think I should have brought the name of the thing, but it's brilliant, really, really interesting sort of model of making stuff. And it goes back to that thing, he's making stuff, he's getting better at it, he goes back, he makes more stuff, and he's generating more views, and he's generating more, a bigger audience. This whole sort of disruptive innovation, Netflix, you know, when we started, Netflix didn't exist. You couldn't stream films. Even just the whole concept of maybe watching something on an iPhone or an iPod prior to the iPhone was just seemed bizarre. You wouldn't watch something that was that big. But now we have a world where Breaking Bad has managed to get to series 5 because at series 2 they were going to get cancelled. They got put on Netflix, and you know, they went from possibly 2 million possible viewers on AMC in the States to millions around the world. Game of Thrones, I think the first episode of the new series, 4 million illegal downloads, which is more than its audience is, and it's also the DVD sales. And interestingly, you've got stuff like Netflix generating its own material now as well, where you have House of Cards being made. There's an argument saying that the only reason that House of Cards could get made, though, which is a remake of obviously a BBC TV series, so there's an existing property already there, and it's also dealing with talent who were generated there their fame. The reason people go and watch it is because David Fincher directed it and people like Kevin Spacey are in it, and Kevin's made his name in movies. So you've got the new disruptive distributors utilising all the hard work of the previous sort of incarnations of the media. Netflix is going to be an interesting one because them and Amazon TV, they collect all of that data. They don't release figures, they collect all of the data of people who watch it and what else they watch, and when the peaks and the troughs of watching. And so it'll be interesting to go where they've been very, very sort of free form of just go out and make stuff. Here, just go out and make your art, go and make whatever you want. It'd be interesting if they then use that data to temper what they commission. Although they have just revealed the other day that they do buy stuff based on its pirating. When we made one of the films we made as Warp'ed really early on, called Complete History of My Sexual Failures, didn't do that well at the cinema, but it was getting pirated loads and had quite good reviews on pirate sites. And we did suggest to Optimum Distributor, can we use the reviews of the pirate sites, sort of thing? And they use that. The distributors are very savvy about it. They kind of go, well, actually, if it's being pirated quite well, then we should look at it. I'm going to try and rattle through very, very quickly some of the stuff. We are storytellers. So all of this stuff that we've learned, and we've learned about films, like I said, we're putting it into films and moving more into TV. We also have something that swamps us is computer games. GTA 5 released 2 days ago. $800 million in 1 day it made, which is more than Superman made in all of its theatrical release, the most recent Superman. Or Man of Steel, sorry, I'm not even calling it the right name. And I always think, well, actually, how did not only did they make that, they're still obviously going to carry on selling it, but they also have, in terms of in-app purchases and games, but the tools of storytelling that we learn at film school, you know, these people use voice actors from films. They want worlds built and stories to be told, and they use script writers from the film and TV world, all feeding into the technology that creates, you know, the sandbox that you can then go and play in. But yeah, and then someone will probably make a film of it, won't they? Which seems a bit bizarre. I'm going to quickly show you, despite all of your best attempts to control the marketing after you've made your film and you've done all that wonderful process and all the art that's put into it and you've made all the money work, you at the moment with distribution, you hand it over to someone else and it goes out into the big wide world. I'll quickly show you, it's only take about 30 seconds, of For Those in Peril. It's a little piece.
The first time ever I saw your face.
So that's a film called For Those in Peril. That's coming out. We took that to Cannes this year. It was our first ever UK film from us in Cannes. It's coming out on the 4th of October. On the same date, George Mackay, who's the young lad now, who's the lead in that, is in Kevin MacDonald's new film, How I Live Now, is coming out. George is the male lead in that. Sunshine on Leith, George is the lead in that. So we've got this beautiful tale, this Terrence Malick-like tale of grief that we spent a huge amount of time on and a huge amount of passion in. And we're probably going to get beaten by the Proclaimers. So, which is, it's quite weird for you, despite the conversations with the financiers are kind of going, or the distributors are kind of going, you do realise you've got, your selling point, your actor is going to just be, I mean, it might work out that because he's in so much other stuff, people accidentally go and see our film rather than Sunshine on Leith, or maybe they like him and they just, you can do a George Mackay-a-thon that whole first week. And another marketing thing quickly for you. This is one of the original posters for Barbarian. If you've not seen it, very sort of giallo 1970s. Toby as a Toby Jones as a sound recordist who gets lured into this crazy world of 1970s horror films. That was a spec for the British poster. It didn't end up like that, but it was similar. And there's the American poster, and deeply, it was very interesting, very arty. However, once it goes out into the market, you have an argument with your of who's going to take it. And at the moment, distribution of DVDs, it's supermarkets are your main market in the for sell through. And so this is the Asda cover of Barbarian Sound Studio. Terror inhabits the screen. There's no blood in the film. There's some tomato juice. But yeah. So you, despite your best intentions, we had a problem with on Four Lions where the cover is of the book, the crow, and it's got a bomb on it, and there was a supermarket that was upset. They thought they might have animal rights issues, and it's like, well, you've got it in a 2 rows along. You've got the freezer department where all the dead chickens are, but our crow with a superimposed bomb on it is an issue. So you lose control. It goes out there. You lose control. And I will quickly wrap up because I'm aware I've talked for an hour at least. So you've got all these distribution methods, you've got everything, all these different possible ways. You can shoot 3D, you can shoot IMAX, you can do Dolby Atmos, you can put all these wonderful technical tools together, but actually ultimately, it kind of comes back to what I was saying before about making good stuff and making good content. And I think if there are making stuff, and learning from making those stuff and breaking things and making mistakes, and that's how I think that's how we've got where we are today, and hopefully that gives you some sort of food for thought for what you guys go out and talk back to your students about. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.